The door slammed open with a force that shook the walls, and there stood my stepfather. His face twisted in rage as he saw me wrapped in Asher's arms. What happened next, the desperate 911 call I made, would uncover secrets that had been suffocating our family for years. I never imagined a simple hug could ignite the explosion that followed, but in that frozen second, with Asher's steady heartbeat against my chest, everything I had buried for 22 years rose to the surface. My name is Gabriel Thompson, and I lived in a quiet suburb just outside Chicago where maple trees lined the streets and every lawn was manicured like a magazine cover. On paper, our life looked perfect. Mom worked as a hospital administrator. Richard ran his own accounting firm downtown, and I was the dutiful son finishing my marketing degree at the University of Illinois. But perfection was a cage Richard had built brick by invisible brick. He controlled everything. My curfew, my phone notifications, even the brands of clothes I wore. "A man provides structure," he would say at dinner, his voice calm but his eyes sharp as knives. Mom would nod quietly, stirring her pasta, never challenging him. I learned early that arguing only made the rules tighter. So I kept my head down, smiled when required, and told myself the tightness in my chest was just stress from finals. Until Asher. We met 6 months earlier during a campus mixer for the arts club. He was 23, tall with messy brown hair that fell into his hazel eyes, studying graphic design and volunteering at the LGBTQ center on weekends. At first, it was easy conversation about indie bands and bad cafeteria coffee. Then one rainy afternoon in the library, he slid a sketch across the table. A simple drawing of 2 guys walking along Lake Michigan. "This is what freedom looks like," he said softly. Something in my chest cracked open. For the first time, I didn't feel alone in the secret I had carried since high school. Our friendship grew in stolen hours. We'd meet at the park near campus, sitting on the same bench under the oak tree, talking about everything and nothing. Asher never pushed. He just listened when I described Richard's nightly interrogations about where I had been and who I had seen. "You deserve to breathe, Gabe," he told me one evening as the sun dipped behind the skyline. His hand brushed mine, and neither of us pulled away. That touch lingered in my dreams for days. At home, the tension thickened like fog. Richard started checking the mileage on my car and questioning every text notification. "Who's this in your phone?" he asked one night, holding my device like evidence. I lied and said it was a study partner. Mom watched from the kitchen, her eyes sad but silent. I felt the walls closing in, yet every time I saw Asher, the world felt possible again. He made me laugh until my sides hurt and dream about a future where I didn't have to hide who I loved. The night it all shattered began innocently enough. Mom was away at a medical conference in Milwaukee, leaving Richard and me alone in the house. I waited until I heard his study door click shut around 10, then texted Asher, "Back door. Quiet." 15 minutes later, he slipped inside, sneakers silent on the hardwood. We sat on the edge of my bed, shoulders touching, whispering about summer plans and whether I could ever tell my family the truth. "You don't have to do it alone," he said, turning to face me. His eyes held no demand, only patience and something deeper that made my throat tight. I leaned forward first, our arms wrapped around each other in a hug that felt like coming home after years at sea. No words, just the steady rhythm of his breathing and the warmth that chased away every fear Richard had planted in me. For one perfect minute, the controlling stepfather downstairs didn't exist. Then the bedroom door exploded inward. Richard stood in the doorway, tie loosened, face drained of color before flooding red with fury. "What the hell is this?" His voice cracked like a whip. Asher pulled back but kept his hand on my shoulder, protective. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. Richard's eyes flicked between us, calculating, and I saw something flicker there. Not just anger, but raw, personal pain. Before I could speak, he lunged forward, grabbing my shirt collar. "Get out of my house," he snarled at Asher. That's when panic took over. My hand fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. Fingers shaking, I dialed 911. "He's attacking me," I gasped into the receiver as Richard's grip tightened. The operator's voice asked for the address, But all I could hear was the blood roaring in my ears and Asher's calm voice saying, "Gabe, breathe. We'll figure this out." Sirens wailed in the distance minutes later. Red and blue lights painted the living room walls as two officers stepped inside. Richard released me instantly, smoothing his shirt like nothing had happened. But the damage was done. The police asked questions, took statements, and something in the way they looked at Richard told me the night was far from over. Little did I know that single call would peel back layers of control I never imagined existed, forcing every one of us to face truths we had spent years burying. The officers stood in our living room like unwelcome guests at a funeral. Notebooks open, flashlights still sweeping the hallway. Richard composed himself with terrifying speed, explaining in his polished accountant voice that it was just a family disagreement. But the younger cop, a woman with sharp eyes, kept glancing at me and Asher, noting the way my shirt was still twisted from Richard's grip. "We need to speak with everyone separately," she said firmly. Asher refused to leave until I nodded that I was okay. He squeezed my hand once in the doorway, his touch a silent promise, then slipped into the night. I watched the taillights of his old Honda disappear down the street and felt the first crack in the armor I had worn for years. Upstairs, the older officer sat with Richard in the study while the female cop guided me to the kitchen table. "Tell me what happened tonight, Gabriel," she said gently. For the first time in my life, I didn't edit the story. I told her about the control, the monitoring, the way Richard had slowly erased every piece of me that didn't fit his perfect picture. I didn't say the word gay yet, but the way her expression softened told me she already understood. By midnight, the police left with a warning and a promise to follow up. Richard didn't speak to me. He locked himself in the study again, but this time I heard the low murmur of his voice on the phone, urgent and unfamiliar. Mom's flight wouldn't land until morning. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Richard's face had shifted from rage to something almost like fear. What was he hiding? The next day brought the first aftershocks. Mom arrived home exhausted, suitcase rolling behind her, and walked straight into the tension hanging in the air. Richard met her at the door with a rehearsed story about me bringing home a troublemaker. But I was done pretending. Over coffee at the kitchen island, I told her everything. The hug, the 911 call, the years of feeling suffocated. Her hand trembled as she set down her mug. "I thought keeping the peace was protecting you," she whispered. For the first time, I saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the quiet sacrifices she had made to keep Richard's rules intact. College became my sanctuary. Asher waited for me outside the business building after my morning lecture, 2 iced coffees in hand. "You okay?" he asked, falling into step beside me. We walked to our usual bench by the lake, the Chicago skyline glittering across the water. I told him about the police visit and Mom's reaction. He listened without interruption, then said, "You took a huge step last night. That took courage." His words wrapped around me like the hug we had shared. In that moment, I realized Asher wasn't just a boyfriend. He was the first person who saw the real me and stayed. But Richard wasn't finished. That evening, he called a family meeting at the dining table, papers spread out like evidence. Bank statements, my phone records, even screenshots of texts I thought I had deleted. "This ends now," he declared, voice steady but knuckles white. He outlined new rules. No phone after 9, no friends over, mandatory weekly check-ins. Mom tried to speak, but he cut her off with a look that silenced the room. I felt the old cage snapping shut tighter than ever. Later that night, I met Asher in the park after dark, slipping out my window like a teenager. We sat on the grass, backs against the oak tree, and I poured out the frustration. "He acts like he owns me," I said. Asher's arm draped around my shoulders. "No one owns you, Gabe. Not him, not anyone." His fingers traced slow circles on my arm, and for a while the world narrowed to just us under the stars. Yet even in that peace I sensed the gathering storm. Richard's control wasn't random. It felt personal, as if my happiness threatened something buried deep inside him. The misunderstanding that nearly broke us came 3 days later. My childhood friend Tyler, who had always been like a brother, overheard me on the phone with Asher and jumped to conclusions. Instead of asking, he went straight to Richard at his office downtown. "Gabriel's hanging with some guy who's turning him," Tyler reported, thinking he was helping. Richard's face when he came home that night was thunder. He cornered me in the garage. "I won't let you throw your life away," he hissed. The betrayal from Tyler stung worse than the words. I had lost one of the few people I thought understood me. Asher held me together through late-night calls. "People fear what they don't understand," he said softly. "But you're stronger than their fear." His quiet faith became my lifeline. Slowly I started making small choices, skipping Richard's mandatory dinners, joining the campus LGBTQ support group Asher recommended. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I had surrendered years ago. Yet every victory came with a price. Mom walked on eggshells, Richard watched me like a hawk, and the house felt more like a battlefield than a home. By the end of the week, I knew the fragile truce wouldn't last. Richard's mysterious late nights increased, and I caught him staring at old photo albums when he thought no one was looking. Something in those faded pictures haunted him, but I was too busy fighting my own battles to ask. Little did I realize the 911 call had already set wheels in motion that would drag every secret into the light, forcing each of us to decide who we truly wanted to be. Mom tried to mediate over breakfast the following Saturday, but Richard's silence was louder than any argument. He pushed his eggs around the plate, eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the window. I could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down on all of us. Later that morning, I slipped out to meet Asher at the art museum downtown, a place where we could lose ourselves among paintings and pretend the outside world didn't exist. We stood in front of a large canvas of two figures reaching toward each other across a stormy sky. "That's us right now," Asher whispered, his shoulder brushing mine. The simple observation steadied me more than any lecture ever could. Back home, the atmosphere had shifted again. Richard announced he was taking a few days off work, something he never did. He spent hours in his study, door closed, the faint sound of typing and occasional sighs drifting into the hallway. Mom pulled me aside in the laundry room. "He's scared, Gabriel." I don't know why, but something about that night shook him. Her voice cracked, and I realized she had been carrying her own invisible burdens. For the first time, I saw her not as the peacekeeper but as a woman trapped between two men she loved in different ways. The betrayal from Tyler festered. He texted me an apology that felt hollow. "Dude, I thought I was helping your dad keep you safe." I didn't reply. Instead, I threw myself into midterms and long runs along the lakefront with Asher. Those runs became therapy. Feet pounding pavement, wind in our faces, conversations flowing easier than ever. He told me about his own coming-out story at 17, how his parents had eventually embraced him after months of silence. "It's not always pretty," he said, wiping sweat from his brow, "but the people worth keeping stick around." His words planted a seed of hope I hadn't dared to water before. Richard's control found new forms. He started casually driving me to campus, sitting in the car until I walked inside. He friended my professors on LinkedIn and asked for progress reports. The pressure built like a storm cloud until one Thursday evening it broke. I came home to find him waiting in my room, my laptop open to private messages with Asher. "Delete these," he ordered, voice low and dangerous. "Or I'll do it for you." Something inside me snapped. "You can't keep erasing me," I shot back. For the first time, I held his gaze without flinching. He looked almost surprised, as if the boy he had molded for years had suddenly grown teeth. That confrontation left us both shaken. Later, I overheard him on the phone in the study, voice strained. "I can't let history repeat itself." The words chilled me. "What history?" Mom refused to elaborate when I asked, only saying, "Some things your stepfather has to tell you himself." The mystery gnawed at me, mixing with the growing certainty that the 911 call had cracked open a door Richard desperately wanted to keep locked. Asher became my safe harbor. We spent a stolen weekend afternoon at Navy Pier, riding the Ferris wheel as the city sparkled below. High above the crowds, he took my hand openly. "No more hiding when we're together," he said. The simple declaration felt revolutionary. I leaned my head on his shoulder, the wind carrying away some of the fear. Yet even in that happiness I sensed the gathering confrontation. Richard's mysterious behavior intensified. Late-night drives, cryptic emails, and a new habit of staring at me across the dinner table as if searching for answers in my face. The misunderstanding escalated when Tyler showed up at our door unannounced, thinking he could smooth things over with Richard. I watched from the hallway as they spoke in hushed tones on the porch. Tyler left looking pale. Later, Richard cornered me again. "That boy Asher is filling your head with nonsense. I won't stand by and watch you ruin your future." His words stung because beneath the anger I heard genuine terror. It was the first crack in his armor, and I filed it away like a clue. College friends noticed the change in me. In the LGBTQ group, I finally said the words out loud during a circle share. "I'm gay, and I'm tired of pretending I'm not." The room erupted in supportive applause, and for the first time the label felt like freedom instead of shame. I texted Asher the news immediately. His reply was simple: "Proud of you. Always." Those 3 words carried me through the next family dinner where Richard's silence felt heavier than ever. The tension reached a breaking point the night Mom suggested family counseling. Richard laughed bitterly. "Therapy won't fix what's already broken." He stormed out, leaving Mom and me at the table with cold coffee and heavier hearts. That was the moment I decided I wouldn't wait for permission anymore. I would live my truth, even if it meant losing the only father figure I had known since age 10. Little did I know that decision would collide with Richard's own buried past in ways none of us could have predicted, turning the 911 call from a moment of panic into the catalyst that would either destroy us or finally set us free. The Friday night everything detonated started with an ordinary dinner. Mom had made lasagna, Richard's favorite, hoping the familiar smell might soften the edges of our fractured home. I sat across from him, pushing food around my plate, Asher's last text still glowing in my mind. "Whatever happens tonight, I'm here." Richard barely ate. His fork scraped the plate like fingernails on a chalkboard. When Mom asked about his day, he snapped, "Not now, Elena." The air thickened until breathing felt difficult. I excused myself early, retreating to my room to call Asher. We talked for an hour about nothing and everything. His latest design project, my upcoming presentation, the way the lake looked at sunset. His voice was the only calm in the storm. "I love you, Gabe," he said quietly before we hung up. The words hung in the air long after the call ended. I hadn't said them back yet, but they echoed in my chest like a promise. Around 11 I heard Richard's footsteps on the stairs, heavier than usual. Then my door opened without a knock. He stood there in sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, eyes red-rimmed. "We need to talk," he said. I sat up slowly. For the first time he didn't look like the controlling tyrant. He looked exhausted, almost broken. "I know about Asher," he continued, "and I know what you are." The word gay never left his mouth, but it floated between us like smoke. What happened next blurred into chaos. He grabbed my phone from the nightstand, scrolling through messages with shaking hands. When he saw the heart emojis and late-night plans, something inside him snapped. "I won't let you make the same mistakes I did," he shouted, voice cracking. He shoved me back against the headboard, not hard enough to bruise but enough to scare. Panic surged. I lunged for the landline on my desk, the one he had installed for emergencies, and dialed 911 again. "He's hurting me," I gasped as Richard tried to yank the phone away. The operator's voice cut through the struggle. "Police are on the way." Red and blue lights flooded the street minutes later. 2 different officers this time, along with a supervisor. Richard released me instantly, stepping back with hands raised. But the female sergeant noticed the overturned lamp and my disheveled shirt. "Everyone outside," she ordered. On the front lawn, under the streetlights, the questions began again. This time Richard's polished facade crumbled. When pressed about the physical contact, he muttered, "I was trying to protect him." The sergeant's eyes narrowed. "From what, exactly?" That's when the floodgates opened. One of the officers asked for ID and ran Richard's name. The computer in the squad car chimed with something unexpected, an old sealed juvenile record from 30 years ago in California. The supervisor stepped aside to make calls. Mom stood on the porch in her robe, tears streaming. I felt Asher's presence before I saw him. He had driven over the moment I texted 911 again, and now stood at the edge of the yard, hands in pockets, waiting. The truth spilled out in fragments under the swirling lights. Richard had been born Richard Harlan in a small town outside San Francisco. At 19 he had fallen in love with his best friend, a boy named Marcus. When their relationship was discovered, his family disowned him, forcing him to leave everything behind. He changed his name, moved to Chicago, and married my mother to bury the past. Every rule, every check, every late-night lock on my door had been his desperate attempt to save me from the pain he still carried. I thought if I controlled everything, you wouldn't end up alone like I was, he confessed, voice raw in front of the officers and my mother. The police didn't arrest him, no charges were pressed, but they left with a report and a recommendation for counseling. Richard sat on the curb long after the cruisers left, head in his hands. Mom knelt beside him, whispering words I couldn't hear. I walked over to Asher, who pulled me into a hug right there on the sidewalk. For the first time, the embrace felt witnessed and unafraid. "You did it," he murmured against my hair. "You survived." That night the house felt different. Richard retreated to the guest room without a word. Mom made tea and sat with me at the kitchen table until dawn, listening as I finally told her about Asher, about the fear, about the love that had kept me going. She cried, but they were different tears, the kind that wash away years of silence. When the sun rose over the maple trees, I knew nothing would ever be the same. The 911 call had done more than summon police. It had summoned truth, and truth, once freed, refused to go back into the cage. The days after the second 911 call stretched like a slow dawn after the longest night. Richard moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding eye contact, speaking only when necessary. Mom suggested family therapy, and surprisingly he agreed. The first session in a quiet office downtown felt like stepping onto thin ice. The therapist, a kind woman named Dr. Patel, asked each of us to share one truth we had hidden. Richard went first. His voice trembled as he described Marcus. The laughter, the stolen nights, the brutal rejection that sent him running across the country. I thought if I could stop Gabriel from feeling that pain, I would have done something right, he admitted, tears tracking down his face. I sat frozen, hearing the man who had controlled my life confess that his iron fist had been forged from his own broken heart. Mom spoke next, revealing she had suspected Richard's past for years, but stayed silent out of fear of losing the stability he provided. "I thought love meant protecting his secret," she said softly. When it was my turn, I looked at both of them and said, "I'm gay, and I'm in love with Asher. I won't hide anymore." The words felt like shedding heavy armor. Dr. Patel nodded, guiding us through the minefield of misunderstandings and betrayals. Tyler's role came up, and I realized his help had been fear disguised as loyalty. I decided to forgive him eventually, but not yet. Asher became part of the healing in unexpected ways. Richard invited him to dinner one Sunday, the first time anyone outside the family had sat at our table in years. The meal was awkward at first, forks scraping plates, but Asher's easy humor slowly thawed the room. He asked Richard about accounting, genuinely interested, and listened when Richard hesitantly spoke about the joy he once found in art before fear erased it. Watching my stepfather and my boyfriend talk felt surreal, like watching two versions of myself bridge a gap I never thought possible. The sacrifice came from Asher. His scholarship required community service hours, and he chose to spend them at the same LGBTQ center where we had first connected deeply. He organized workshops on family acceptance, pouring his energy into helping others avoid the isolation Richard had endured. "This is bigger than us," he told me one evening as we walked along the lake. I realized then how much he had risked. Late nights, emotional labor, even facing his own past rejections. All to stand beside me. His quiet strength taught me that love wasn't just romance. It was showing up when everything was messy. I began my own growth in small, deliberate steps. I joined the Campus Pride Committee, helped plan the annual parade float, and for the first time posted a photo of Asher, and me on social media with the caption, "Finally free." The comments from friends and strangers poured in, some supportive, some questioning, but the fear of judgment no longer dictated my choices. Richard saw the post and didn't comment, but the next morning he left a small sketch on my desk. Two figures walking hand in hand under an oak tree. No note, just the drawing. It was his way of saying he was trying. Misunderstandings still surfaced. Mom struggled with the new openness, sometimes slipping back into old habits of smoothing things over. One afternoon she suggested I tone it down before a neighborhood barbecue. I refused gently but firmly. "This is who I am, Mom. If the neighbors can't handle it, that's their problem." She blinked, then hugged me. "You're right. I'm still learning." Those moments of honest conversation became the new normal. Richard's awakening unfolded quietly. He started seeing a therapist alone, unpacking decades of shame. One evening he found me in the backyard and sat on the patio steps. "I was wrong," he said simply. "Controlling you didn't protect you. It almost broke you."
I'm sorry.
The apology wasn't perfect, but it was real. We didn't hug. That would take time. But the silence between us felt lighter. Through it all, Asher remained my constant. We celebrated small victories. My first Open Pride event, his gallery show featuring a piece inspired by our story. Lazy Sundays where we cooked together in his apartment. Each moment built the foundation of a future we were choosing, not hiding. The 911 call that had once felt like the end of my world had become the beginning of the life I was meant to live. Messy, honest, and finally mine. Spring arrived in Chicago with blooming lilacs and longer days that mirrored the lightness settling over our house. Richard started painting again. Small watercolors of the lake that he hung in the hallway without fanfare. Mom joined a book club and began speaking up at family dinners, her voice gaining strength with each honest conversation. I watched the transformation with quiet awe, realizing that truth, once spoken, had the power to reshape everything it touched. Asher and I graduated that May in a ceremony filled with caps and cheers. He received his degree in graphic design. I finished marketing with honors. Richard and Mom sat in the audience beside Asher's parents, all four of them clapping as our names were called. Later at the celebration dinner, Richard raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said, looking directly at me and Asher. The toast was simple, but the look in his eyes carried years of regret and hope. Asher squeezed my hand under the table, and I finally said the words I had been holding, "I love you." He smiled the smile that had started everything. "I know. I love you too." Summer brought the next chapter. Asher and I moved into a small apartment near campus, close enough for Sunday dinners but far enough to breathe. Richard helped carry boxes, joking about manual labor therapy. The man who once monitored my every move now asked for updates on our lives. Genuinely interested. He even attended a PFLAG meeting with Mom, sitting quietly in the back row as parents shared stories of acceptance. His own journey wasn't linear. Some days the old fear returned, but he kept showing up. My friendship with Tyler mended slowly. He showed up at our apartment one afternoon with pizza and an apology that included actual tears. "I was scared for you," he admitted. "Turns out I was scared for myself too." We talked for hours, and by the end I understood that betrayal often hides behind good intentions. We didn't erase the hurt, but we built something new on honesty. The real growth showed in the quiet moments. One evening Asher and I sat on the balcony watching the city lights, his arm around my shoulders. "Remember the night I called 911? I asked. He nodded. "Best panic decision you ever made." We laughed, but the truth settled deep. That single act of desperation had forced every hidden piece of our family into the light, allowing us to choose love over fear. Richard's final gesture came on my 23rd birthday. He handed me an envelope containing a plane ticket to San Francisco and a letter. Inside was the address of Marcus, now a successful artist living openly with his husband. "If you want to meet him, I understand," Richard wrote. "Some stories need closing chapters." I cried reading it, then hugged him for the first time since I was a child. The embrace was awkward and perfect. Asher and I took the trip together that fall. We met Marcus in a sunny cafe overlooking the bay. He listened to our story with kind eyes and shared his own memories of young Richard. "He was brave once," Marcus said. "I'm glad he's learning to be brave again." The conversation healed something in all of us. On the flight home, I looked at Asher asleep against my shoulder and felt a profound gratitude for every twist, every misunderstanding, every sacrifice that had led us here. Our life now is far from perfect. We still face questions at family gatherings, awkward glances from old neighbors, and the occasional internal doubt. But we face them together with a family that is learning to stand beside us instead of controlling us. The controlling stepfather became a man finding his own freedom. The frightened son became a man who refuses to hide. And the love that started with a simple hug in a forbidden bedroom grew into something strong enough to rewrite every rule. Looking back at the night that changed everything, I realized the 911 call wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of everyone's. True or false? Hiding your true self to protect family peace is always the right choice?